Hi, good morning. So I'm going to talk about the criminalization of HIV non-disclosure as an additional source of fear and anxiety for people living with HIV. Because as you will see through my presentation, it creates a serious additional challenge to already difficult decision-making around disclosure and risk behavior. So during my presentation, I will give you an overview of what's happening in Canada around criminalization of exposure or transmission of HIV, and raise some concern that we have around criminalization, and hopefully have time to give you some example of community responses to criminalization. So just very briefly, I wanted to say a few words about the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network. I don't know if you know this organization. It's based in Toronto, but it's a Canadian organization that works on to promote and defend the rights of people living with HIV and people vulnerable to HIV in Canada and internationally. So what do we talk about when we say we talk about criminalization of HIV exposure or transmission? We talk about the fact that in Canada, a person living with HIV can be prosecuted for non-disclosing HIV positive status before engaging in an activity that represents a significant risk of HIV transmission. So the notion of significant risk of HIV transmission is very important because there is no general duty to disclose. There is a duty to disclose when there is a significant risk of HIV transmission. What does that mean? We'll see after that. It's difficult to say. It's very important to know that people can be prosecuted even if no partner get infected. It's not about HIV transmission. The crime is about exposure. I'm going to talk here about HIV non-disclosure in the context of consensual sex, because this is where the great majority of the cases arise. But activities that represent a significant risk of HIV transmission could be something else, like sharing equipment, but so far there is no case about that. I'm also talking about HIV here because this is where the law has applied so far, but the rule is to disclose before engaging in an activity that represents a significant risk of serious bodily harm. So it could apply to other sexual transmitted infection, and there have been 3 cases, one about herpes, one about hepatitis C and hepatitis B. So to give you an overview of what's happening in Canada around HIV non-disclosure and criminalization, there is approximately 70,000 people diagnosed with HIV in Canada since 1985, and there have been more than 100 criminal prosecutions for HIV transmission or exposure till December 2009. And since that time, the numbers have increased, and I believe that there is around 120 cases so far. There have been a significant increase in the number of cases, especially since 2003, and with an average of 10 cases per year. Most of the people who have been charged are men, so that's interesting to look at that. It's really striking. It's 91% of the cases. The vast majority of the charges and convictions are against men who have sex with women. So it's very around heterosexual sex. There is about 10 cases against HIV positive women who had sex with men. And there is around 18 cases against men who had sex with men. And these cases are pretty recent, actually. I think it's only from 2004 and 2009 that those cases arise. So there may be a change in the approach of using the criminal justice to deal with the HIV non-disclosure issue in the gay community. The majority of the charges are in Ontario. It accounts for 47% of the cases. BC is the 3rd province with 11% of the cases. So just to show you how kind of important is this issue and serious, is that 83% of the people we know have been convicted were sent to jail. So we've seen that there is an increase in cases, but there is also an increase in the severity of the charges that are being laid against people who don't disclose their status. So people have been charged with criminal negligence, aggravated assault. There are more and more charged with aggravated sexual assault that carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. So it's really the most serious charges that are used to deal with these cases. There have been also one case of murder. One man has been convicted of first-degree murder for transmitting HIV. It's, to my knowledge, the only murder charge in the world. And we've seen some charges of attempted murder, but no conviction on that as far as I know. So what is the law exactly? The law and the rule is not written in the books. It's actually the Supreme Court of Canada, so the highest court in the justice system, that established that rule by interpreting some existing disposition in the criminal code around the law of assault. And in fact, the Supreme Court of Canada decided that when someone knows he's HIV positive and doesn't disclose his status to his partner, that may actually transform consensual sex into an assault if non-disclosure has the effect to expose a partner to a significant risk of serious bodily harm, which can be HIV transmission, and that the partner, individual, would not have had sex if he had known about the HIV positive status. So the Crown will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, the Crown is the one who's prosecuting the case, that the person knew he had HIV, that the person did not disclose or lie about the status, that resulted in exposing the partner to a significant risk of transmission, and that the partner would not have had sex if he had known. Then the assault becomes aggravated when it actually endangers the individual's life, and the Supreme Court say, well, if it had the effect of exposing someone to HIV transmission, then it endangered the partner's life, and this is why we can apply the law of aggravated assault. So the main problem beyond is criminalization problem, but as a legal issue, it's the lack of clarity around what constitutes a significant risk of HIV transmission in the sense of the criminal law. So when do people have a duty to disclose? And this is really a big problem right now, because I just don't really know what to say, and the law is unclear, and so it's really hard for people to actually know what the law is expecting from them. The starting point is this Supreme Court decision, Carrier in 1998, that I mentioned before. The case was pretty straightforward because it was unprotected vaginal sex at a time when the science around HIV treatment, its impacts on viral load was still not very developed, and so it was pretty easy for the court to say there is a significant risk of HIV transmission in case of unprotected vaginal sex. And so there is a duty to disclose in case of unprotected sex. But what about other sexual activities and factors that reduce the risk of HIV transmission? How are they taken into account? That has been led to the courts at lower level to actually determine that. Most of the cases have reached only the lower levels, and so there is inconsistency in the interpretation of evidence around HIV risk of transmission in the court. Some cases are now reaching the Court of Appeal level, and we hope to have more clarity in the law at that time. But for example, condom use. How condom use, what is the impact of condom use in the assessment of the significant risk? The Supreme Court didn't have to rule on that because it was a case about unprotected sex, but still the judge suggested that condom use might reduce the risk, but he didn't decide on that. So I suggest that it might be sufficient when to reduce the risk below the threshold of a significant risk. Some trial courts ruled in favor of not criminalizing non-disclosure when a condom is used, but some people have been convicted. I know about at least 2 cases, one that has been reversed in appeal. The BC Court of Appeal refused to set clear benchmarks, saying that the question whether a condom will be sufficient will depend on each case. So it's something that basically each judge or juror will have to determine. There is one encouraging development in Manitoba. It's very recent. In October, the Court of Appeal of Manitoba actually acquitted a man who when he carefully and constantly used a condom with his partner. So that means that at least in Manitoba, for now, if you carefully use and constantly use a condom, you should not be convicted of aggravated assault. But this is in Manitoba, and the law, therefore, is still unclear. This is something that is developing. Oral sex, some trial decisions refuse to admit that someone could be convicted for unprotected oral sex because it's low risk. But in Hamilton, in Ontario, someone has been convicted for oral unprotected sex. In the same time, a bit later in Hamilton, same city, Crown decided to stay charges, so suspend charges for unprotected oral sex. So again, no clarity, it's evolving, it's depending on cases. Undetectable viral load. We know now that thanks to the treatment, the viral load can reach a level that is undetectable, and that has an impact on the risk of HIV transmission. This is a very new issue before the court, whether viral load can be a factor taken into account when they assess the risk of transmission. At the trial level, there is inconsistency in the court, but there is some encouraging development at the Court of Appeal level, which is stronger. In BC, for example, the Court of Appeal say that viral load is a very relevant factor that the court have to take into account. And in Manitoba, again, same court decision. The man was acquitted when he had unprotected sex, but his viral load was undetectable. So again, this is a very new issue, and the law is developing around this. So I just want to highlight this major case, this major decision of the Court of Appeal of Manitoba. Again, it's only Manitoba, but it shows you that there can be some encouraging development when judges are informed about science and base their decision on science rather than fear and prejudice. And also, for your information, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network intervened in this case to argue that people should not be convicted when they use a condom or have an undetectable viral, because it just doesn't make sense. So this man was acquitted on 4 counts of aggravated sexual assault when he carefully used a condom or had an undetectable viral load. It's very interesting that the court point out that significant risk means something other than an ordinary risk, and that we should look for an important, serious, substantial risk, because some Crown prosecutor will think, well, any risk is significant when we talk about HIV. So the Court of Appeal here clearly say this is not the law in Canada. We need something significant. Interesting as well, the judge clearly say that the legal assessment must be based on science and be consistent with science. And also that criminal sanctions should only be reserved for those deliberate, irresponsible, or reckless individuals who do not respond to public health directive or who are truly blasphemous, saying by that the criminal should not be there should not be an overly broad use of the criminal to deal with the issue of HIV non-disclosure. I also just want to mention one other interesting development in Vancouver. It's at the trial level, but a judge kind of the same statement around the necessity to use the science, the necessity to use criminal law as a last resort. It's cases where a man was acquitted even though he had unprotected anal sex, but he was the receptive partner, and given the evidence that was before the court, the judge say, well, in that case, the risk was not significant. So why are we concerned about criminalization? We are concerned about criminalization because it's a very blunt instrument to deal with the complex issue like HIV non-disclosure and risky sexual behavior. Criminalization applies the same whether it's a casual or a permanent relation. It applies. So it doesn't take into account all these different factors that makes disclosure, depend on the situation, depend on your relationship, etc. It doesn't take this into account. Plus, there is no evidence that it actually helps to prevent new infection. The Supreme Court of Canada, when it say there is a role for the criminal law, actually say yes, because the criminal law can help to prevent HIV by, creating a deterrent effect. But we have no evidence that it's actually deterring people for not disclosing their status or having risky behavior. And we believe that, in fact, it may actually undermine public health efforts. It's also obviously an additional source of fear and anxiety for people living with HIV, especially when we see that the law is so unclear and so they don't even know what the law expects from them. And it's also scary because some people may be even afraid that even if they disclosed, how they're going to prove that, and that they may not be protected from litigation even if they disclosed. Finally, criminalization reinforces stigmatization, and that especially when it's associated with sensational media coverage, which is often the case. So very quickly, some example of the community responses to criminalization, because some activists and advocates are actually working to limit restrict the expensive use of the criminal law by developing evidence. So I encourage you to actually look at this report that was made by Glenn Betteridge, who used to work at the Canadian Legal Network, Eric Michalowski, who is a social professor at York University, and David McLeay, who is a scientific person. And in this report basically creates the evidence to show that there is a problem in the current use of the criminal law by showing the inconsistency in courts' interpretation of the legal test, but also highlighting the complexity of the science, and finally with a social analysis of the impact of criminalization on people's life and also on service providers' work. So it's a good document that you can order for free on KTE website. By challenging the law, I mentioned the intervention before the courts, also educating the judges, developing tools for defense criminal lawyer, challenging police and crown practice. In Ontario, we have now a campaign to call for guidelines for crown prosecutors, so they have some guidance and actually to kind of limit the number of cases who actually get to the court level. And also by challenging misinformation with having this kind of forum, talking about what's the law, but also challenging the media coverage and talking about this issue in different settings. So thank you very much for your attention. I just want to highlight this is the website where you can have more information about the criminal law. And the report I mentioned, it's just down, Eric Michalowski and Glenn Betteridge, David McLeay. Thank you.